dollar and take our dollar as the standard, take it off as the standard. And that's okay if they want to play that game, but I can play that game too. So anybody that's in BRICS is getting a
If Trump's tariffs and economic threats continue to escalate, the prospect of a full-scale currency war may soon shift from speculation to inevitability. Analysts are already outlining a troubling scenario. BRICS will not remain at the level of symbolic statements. They are likely to fast-track trials of a joint digital reserve currency, giving nations a direct alternative to the US dollar. If this becomes a functioning system, the question will no longer be, will the dollar be challenged? But rather, how quickly will its dominance unravel? This is no longer about a theoretical shift decades away. It's about what could happen in the next 2 to 3 years, a timeline that few in Washington appear prepared to confront. Beijing's financial think tanks predict that China could begin pilot oil trade settlements with Russia via an expanded BRICS Pay digital system as early as 2026. India is reportedly laying the legal foundation to allow steel, coal, and even pharmaceutical transactions to bypass dollar clearinghouses. Analysts estimate that even these initial pilot programs could exceed $30 billion annually, creating a symbolic precedent that challenges the psychological grip of the US dollar. What worries Washington isn't just trade volume, it's the speed of trust migration. Countries outside BRICS, including Turkey, Egypt, and Indonesia, have already expressed informal interest in participating once the system proves reliable. A senior European energy executive was quoted privately saying, "The first step is small contracts. Once we see the system doesn't collapse, we follow the cheaper, safer option, and that might not be the dollar." The U.S. Treasury, in response, might resort to aggressive monitoring of global banks that process BRICS-linked transactions, even threatening sanctions on those that adopt the new system. But such tactics could backfire spectacularly. Experts warn that overusing dollar-based sanctions risks encouraging more nations to disconnect from SWIFT, the U.S.-dominated global payment network. "You can't punish everyone forever," said one former IMF advisor. "At some point, they build their own road." Global reserve strategies would also shift. Analysts predict that national central banks, especially in developing economies, could diversify reserves into gold and yuan as a hedge. South Africa, a relatively small player in global finance, might announce a cut in its dollar reserves below 50%, a move that, while symbolic, could ripple through Latin America and parts of Africa. Corporate strategy would not remain untouched. Multinational giants like Samsung, Maersk, and European logistics companies are expected to establish parallel settlement systems using BRICS Pay to mitigate the risk of sudden U.S. sanctions or tariff escalations. A senior executive at a major shipping conglomerate recently remarked, "We can't rely solely on a currency whose policies change with every election." Inside Washington, political fractures are likely to widen. Hardliners may continue to defend Trump's stance, framing tariffs as a necessary show of force. But moderates and financial technocrats could argue that such policies are accelerating the very threat they aim to prevent. "You don't keep friends by putting a gun to their head," warned a former Treasury official during a recent policy forum. Meanwhile, BRICS leaders are expected to make bold commitments at their upcoming summits. Several insiders suggest a target to reduce the share of USD in intra-block trade to below 20% by 2028. Even if this goal takes longer than expected, its announcement alone would send a powerful psychological signal that the U.S. can no longer take its monetary dominance for granted. And perception, as economists repeatedly emphasize, can become reality. Once major economies begin planning for a post-dollar system, the momentum toward diversification becomes self-reinforcing. The dollar's greatest strength has never been its paper value. It has been the trust that everyone would continue using it. If that trust weakens, numbers will follow. The future may not collapse overnight. The US dollar could remain the world's dominant currency for years. But cracks are forming, and the greatest danger lies not in an immediate replacement, but in the gradual erosion of confidence. Trump may respond with harsher tariffs, more sanctions, or louder rhetoric, but every aggressive step risks being a double-edged sword, pushing countries to adopt alternatives faster than Washington can react. The defining question will soon shift from, how do we defend the dollar, to, how will the U.S. survive in a world learning to live without it? Because in global finance, power doesn't come from coercion. It comes from trust. And once that trust is broken, it is almost impossible to buy back, even with the world's most powerful currency.
Another letter has been posted on Truth Social, the president writing to the leader of Brazil, saying that he's imposing a 50% tariff on all imports coming in from Brazil as soon as August. a Section 301 investigation into all imports coming in from Brazil.
On July 9th, 2025, the White House posted another tariff letter, this time aimed squarely at Brazil. A full 50% tariff on all imports, effective August 1st. It's the highest rate announced so far in this administration's latest wave of trade pressure. This move wasn't unexpected, but it was still jarring. For Brazil, it was a direct escalation. For the rest of the world, it was a warning, especially for nations still in negotiation or running out of time to get there. Canada and the European Union are both in the room with Trump's team, but they're not safe. They're on the clock. The Brazil letter did more than slap a high tariff. It triggered a formal Section 301 investigation into Brazilian imports, something Trump had used in his first term to justify long-term tariffs on Chinese goods. But what made this letter stand out wasn't the economics. It was the politics. In the post, Trump linked the decision to Brazil's handling of former President Jair Bolsonaro. He called it unfair. He called it a witch hunt. And that made the 50% tariff not just about trade, but about power. Brazil didn't get a negotiation window, it got a punishment. The kind that doesn't start with a phone call, it starts with a headline. And with that, Brazil became the latest example of how this White House is using tariffs not only to correct trade imbalances, but to send political messages.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the EU was working closely with the Trump administration to reach a deal.
Well, in Ottawa, the PMO says Canada's July 21st deadline is serious, and consequences for failing to meet the deadline for Canada aren't known.
While Brazil faces tariffs outright, the European Union and Canada are deep in negotiation, each on a tight, ticking schedule. The EU is pushing hard to finalize a deal before August 1st. European Commission leaders confirmed that talks with the US are active and making progress. Trade Chief Maros Šefčovič said a joint statement is close. But Italy's economy minister warned, it's complicated. The text may not be finished until the last minute. Canada, meanwhile, is working against a different clock. Prime Minister Mark Carney's team is negotiating under a July 21st deadline, 10 days earlier than Europe's. This special cutoff reflects how Trump's team has chosen to handle Canada separately, after Canada dropped its digital services tax on June 30th to reopen talks. Unlike the EU, Canada is keeping things quiet. No daily briefings, no policy statements, just back-channel movement. And that silence might be deliberate, because in this game, what isn't said can be just as important as what is. Still, both regions are in the same position. Negotiate fast or face tariffs soon. The threat isn't distant. It's set to arrive August 1st. The Trump administration has said over 20 nations could face tariffs in the coming weeks if they don't enter negotiations. On July 10th, the White House confirmed more tariff notices would roll out in phases, targeting sectors like semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and other strategic supply chain goods. This reflects a shift in strategy. The new tariff wave isn't just about trade balances, it's about alignment. Countries seen as moving closer to China could face heightened scrutiny. In that light, Brazil's case stands out. The 50% tariff, paired with a Section 301 investigation, came amid concern over its strengthening ties with Beijing. In response, China has warned that countries signing deals with the US that harm its interests may face retaliation. This is no longer just trade policy, it's positioning in a global contest, and the consequences will be economic. What happened with Brazil wasn't just about one country, it was about setting the tone. Trump is reshaping trade not through global frameworks, but through pressure and pacing. Some countries get letters, others get deadlines. But all of them now face a decision: move fast or pay the price. For the EU, the calendar says July 31st. For Canada, it's July 21st. For the rest, the time is shrinking, and the tariffs are already written. This isn't just a negotiation anymore, it's a countdown.
With the trade war between Canada and the United States causing economic uncertainty, Canadian leaders are looking to Asia and Europe for reliable trade partners.
European negotiators say trade between the U.S. and EU could be effectively cut off if Trump goes ahead with a 30% tariff that he threatened over the weekend.
America's global influence was built not just on military power, but on long-standing partnerships, especially in trade. Today, that foundation is starting to break. If President Trump continues to raise tariffs on key allies, the United States risks more than short-term retaliation. It could lose its central role in the global economy. Canada is shifting its trade strategy. The European Union is preparing to strike back. And together, these moves are showing that the world may be ready to move on without U.S. leadership.
The deals are made. There are no deals to make. They would like to do a different kind of a deal, and we're always open to talk. We are open to talk, including to Europe. In fact, they're coming over, they'd like to talk.
President Trump believes that high tariffs will force other countries to accept better trade terms. But if those countries decide to stop relying on the U.S. altogether, the result could be long-term damage. When global supply chains adjust, the changes are not easily reversed. Companies may move production away from North America. Trade flows may shift permanently. Key U.S. industries, like finance, pharmaceuticals, and technology, could face new restrictions and rising costs in foreign markets. And once trading partners begin to rely less on U.S. systems, including the dollar and American tech platforms, the U.S. risks being left out of decisions that shape the global economy. The European Union is treating Trump's tariffs not just as an economic threat, but as a strategic rupture. Officials in Brussels say a 30% tariff on EU goods could effectively wipe out transatlantic trade. According to the European Commission, the U.S. imports more than $600 billion annually from the EU, while exporting only $370 billion. At first, the EU held back, pausing a $25 billion countermeasure package to allow for dialogue. But they've already prepared a larger $72 billion retaliation if talks collapse. Their strategy is twofold: de-escalate if possible, but punish if necessary. What's notable isn't just the scope of the response. It's the areas being targeted, U.S. services like finance and tech, where retaliation would hurt most.
Last month, you look at the data from Statistics Canada, which looks at the month of May, and we saw the highest amount of merchandise exports to non-U.S. countries since at least 2021.
Canada's response has been quieter, but no less consequential. After Trump's tariff announcement, exports to the U.S. dropped sharply. In May 2025, Statistics Canada reported just $41 billion in exports to the U.S., a 25% decline from January. Meanwhile, exports to non-U.S. countries rose to $19 billion, the highest since 2021. Canada is redirecting gold to the UK, oil to Singapore, pharmaceuticals to Italy. More than that, Canada is reopening dialogue with India, despite political tension. For Alberta and Saskatchewan, accessing India's pulse crop market is critical. This isn't just diversification, it's a structural shift. Prime Minister Mark Carney isn't threatening countermeasures. He's methodically building an economy that no longer depends on the U.S., a move supported by both policy and public sentiment. Trump's strategy is clear. He believes pressure forces deals. But pressure without flexibility can create fractures. The EU isn't folding, Canada isn't waiting. And if Trump continues down this path, America may win a few concessions, but lose the cohesion that once made it powerful. In trying to maximize leverage, Washington could undermine its own role in global leadership. Allies won't leave in anger. They'll simply move on, with new partners, new trade routes, and a future that no longer revolves around the U.S. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. Trump's tariff play may feel strong in the short term, but the long game is different. And as Canada restructures and Europe prepares its counterpunch, one reality grows clearer. The world won't wait for America to lead. Not if it keeps pushing them away.